Mr. Ranking Minority Member.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I have a bill for committee 25 RS 0717, a bill concerning making the General Election Day a state holiday.
Okay, is there any objection to introduction of this bill? Seeing no objections, the bill will be introduced. Is there any other bill introductions? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to the next order of business, which is a hearing on House Bill 2057. Mr. Revisor, could you give us a rundown of that bill?
Mike Heim in the Revisor Statutes Office. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, House Bill 2057 would change the way vacancies are filled in the offices of the United States Senate, the State Treasurer, and the Commissioner of Insurance. Currently, the governor appoints these three persons when there's a vacancy. The repealer in the bill on the title there, 25-318, is a statute that provides the governor would appoint the vacancy for the U.S. Senate, and sections 7 and 8, respectively, the State Treasurer and the Commissioner of Insurance statutes are amended to provide for how this bill would change things. It establishes a process whereby the legislature would recommend up to 3 names for the governor to pick. They would have to be from the same political party as the person that the vacancy occurred. There's a procedure for a trigger of a formation of a 14-member joint committee on vacancies. They come together, hold hearings and so on, come up with 5 names, and then the full legislature narrows it down to 3. So anyway, it's a process.
Are there any questions for the revisor? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. We'll move on to proponent testimony. Our first conferee is Speaker Pro Tem Blake Carpenter. Welcome back to the committee. It's been a few years.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's always good being back in elections. So I used to be the chair of elections for you, those of you that might not know that. No, thank you so much for allowing me to come today before you. My testimony is in front of you, so I'm not going to read from that. And the revisor did a great job explaining the bill. So in recent years, not even in recent years, for many years in Kansas, not just with the current governor, but with other governors, we've had an issue where governors will pick people to replace statewide office holders or potentially even U.S. senators that don't have to be of the same party as the one that's vacating the office. And so I believe that if the voters put in a Democrat or if the voters put in a Republican, that is the party that should hold that office. We've seen it in recent years. We saw it in the early 2000s or mid 2000s as well. And so this bill lays out that process for the legislature to make that determination. Now, as you look at this legislation, one thing that I want to note is that when I started studying this bill and how we could craft it, prior to the 17th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, the legislatures actually used to be the ones that picked U.S. senators. And so what I did was I went with the revisers back in time to about 1897, and we actually looked at the statute on how we used to appoint U.S. senators here in the state of Kansas. And so while it is not exactly what was written in 1897 due to the 17th Amendment and all the requirements that we have to follow within that process, we can't just pick one person for U.S. senator. And there's also some arguments that says that we can't just pick one person for the governor to select from for treasurer or insurance commissioner as well. So that's why we ended up giving 3 nominees that we were handing to the governor for them to choose. Again, basic requirements: have to be a resident of the state of Kansas and have to be a member of that political party in order to qualify as a nominee for the governor to consider. And so this bill was drafted, like I said, using the bones of what we did back in 1897. And our goal was to try to, or at least my goal was to try to make it to where the legislature, the people's representatives, in both the House and the Senate had more of a say on how these individuals are selected. I know that there's been other bills in the past that have tried to make it to where the parties pick. But for me, I thought that it would be better and more in line with the founding and our country in general if we were to go back to what the founders had, where the legislatures played more of a role in the process. I'm more than happy to stand for any questions, Mr. Chairman, that the committee might have.
Are there any questions for the Speaker Pro Tem? Representative Simmons.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative Carpenter. You mentioned this has happened. Can you tell us about it in Kansas, where the governor has appointed a replacement that was not of the party elected? Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Simmons, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, so in recent times, Governor Laura Kelly replaced Jake LaTurner. He was the state treasurer. He went to Congress. She replaced him with Lynn Rogers. Before that, there was another replacement. However, it was same party where Jake LaTurner replaced somebody else. So in that instance, it didn't end up being a cross-party issue, but that was because I think the governor was Republican, and so was that office. Prior to that, Sebelius actually replaced Lynn Jenkins, state treasurer. She went on to Congress as well and replaced with Dennis McKinney, if I recall correctly. And so that was around the 2008 time period, if I recall. But my dates might be a little off, but in general, those are the names, at least after the year 2000 that I can recall off the top of my head. Prior to 2000, I have to go do some more research.
Are there any more questions for the Speaker Pro Tem? Mr. Vice Chairman.
Yes, thank you for your testimony here. A couple questions. So as far as the trajectory of other states, I mean, is there any sort of other states do it kind of like this? I mean, what did you find out in your research on how other states do it?
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So other states have different models. Some states allow for the governor to pick, just like we have similarly today. Some states allow it to where once a vacancy opens up, the special election basically happens right away. Utah actually is kind of where I started to derive our system from. The state of Utah actually in recent years, I think it was 2021, they updated their legislation on what happens when a vacancy occurs in their state. However, I did not feel the Utah model was something that we should try to mimic here, and I think that all of you around the table will know why right now. In Utah, they basically gave the appointment authority to what is our version of the LCC. And so I figured that the legislature did not want a small group of leaders, the LCC, to choose who these nominees were. And so instead of mimicking or copying what Utah did, I made it to where we have a joint session. We actually have conversations where both House members and senators are able to talk about these candidates from the well, all as one body, both Republicans, Democrats. Basically, you know, what we do today with Committee of the Whole, where we actually go down, we articulate our ideas, we articulate why a candidate's good, why a candidate's bad, and then afterwards have a vote. And then from those 5, we derive 3, and that's who we send to the governor.
Any other questions? Representative Tarwater.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so congressmen are left out of this because we have special elections for them?
Thank you, Representative. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So congressmen, there's already a way that is set up for them, and what happens when a congressman vacates a seat or it's empty is that a special election happens right away. And so we saw that in 2016 when Representative Mike Pompeo went to become the CIA director. It automatically triggered a special election to where we had to replace him within a certain amount of months.
Are there any other questions, Mr. Ranking Minority Member? I just can't do that today. I don't know what's going on.
It's all right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Speaker Pro Tem, for your testimony. I'm just curious on page 2 of the bill, you start breaking down. I'm not sure if it's you, but the members of this committee, 14 members of the committee, 5 members are from the majority, 2 are from the minority on both sides here. How did that ratio get determined? Because it,
Y'all want to mess with that ratio, go for it. It was,
okay.
that was just the numbers that I picked.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions for the Speaker Pro Tem? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much for
Thank you,
your
Mr. Chair.
testimony.
Thank you, committee.
Our next conferee is Congressman Tim Huelskamp. Welcome to the committee, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A pleasure to be here, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, but please don't hold it against me. I served 14 years in the other side of the building, and during that entire tenure, I served on the Senate Elections and Local Government Committee. It was called back then. I was 6 years as the chairman, and then, as you know, I served a number of terms in the U.S. Congress. So one point I would like to make is to kind of back up a little bit and look at what our founders intended and what their choices were. You know, at that time in the world, there basically were two choices for government, and one of those was a pure democracy on one hand, and on the other hand was top-down authoritarianism. And as you know, our system instead our founders chose a representative republic, in which the American citizens choose the representatives in free, fair, and open elections. We do not have a king, and nor do we have the dream of the ancient Greeks where every citizen would vote on every matter. In my opinion, unfortunately, the current system in Kansas for selection in these three offices violates, I believe, the fundamental premises of our representative republic. Instead of allowing citizens of Kansas to select an individual, current law places this enormous power in the hands of one single individual, whoever happens to occupy the office of governor. This one solitary individual behind closed doors determines, in these cases, our next U.S. senator, state treasurer, or insurance commissioner. There are no restrictions in the law on who they might choose. The same party, the other party, no party, or not even a registered voter. Someone well-known to Kansans or completely new resident to our state. The governor could even appoint their spouse, their daughter or son, or a top key campaign donor. There are no restrictions in the law, no opportunity for citizens to decide or have input who represents them in these positions. In fact, the governor might actually self-appoint to one of these positions, and that's actually occurred in U.S. history, by my count, 9 different times where sitting governors appointed themselves to the U.S. Senate. Thankfully, in 8 of these 9 situations, the voters rose up and made sure they didn't serve an additional term in the next election. But in one case, senators served multiple terms after appointing themselves. So, but in my opinion, even if they're kicked out of the office, the damage had already been done, because by a vote of 1-0, the governor, soon-to-be senator, assumed the office, cast the votes, and claimed to represent the citizens when they indeed had not. In my opinion, such power also encourages corruption, and we only need to look to Illinois for the most recent example of corruption surrounding the appointment to the U.S. Senate. In 2010, the then governor of Illinois was impeached, removed from office, and later found guilty of corruption by a federal jury for attempting to sell the U.S. Senate seat vacated by then President Barack Obama. Of no particular note, and this was the 4th Illinois governor to serve time in federal prison. Additionally, we also had the situation here in Kansas, the most recent situation, 1996, when then presidential candidate and Senator Bob Dole resigned his office, announced his resignation on May 15th, 1996. But the date he announced his resignation was June 11th. And I think folks in this room, knowing a little bit of history, might know why that date was picked. That was the date, the day after the filing deadline. And so then Governor Bill Graves picked a successor, but you might recall, and I was not in the legislature then. I am not that long ago, but then Governor Ron Thornburg says, nope, the statute's unclear. We will have an election. And there was an election that fall, and a new senator was picked. And I think that was a wise announcement. It was kind of surprising. But in any of these situations, I think we can agree that placing such power in the hands of one individual poses a significant risk to the principles of representation. Concentrating such authority in a single individual can lead to abuses of power, certainly lack of accountability, and the erosion of checks and balances that are essential to a fair and just society. I also hope we can agree that such power of all these appointments can lead to favoritism, rejection of the will of the voters, and outright corruption. It's the case of the ultimate insider making the ultimate insider decision, and I don't believe that should be the case in Kansas. Now, there are many avenues to fix this problem, and House Bill 2057 is one solution by involving legislators from every single district across the state, and I think it would be a definite step forward. And because everyone in this room, on this committee and legislature actually does face the voters. Another solution is, as was mentioned by, brought up by the question, I think, for Representative Tarwater, that you could have a special election, as was indicated and deployed most recently in the 4th Congressional District. Or even allowing duly elected party officials. Party officials in both of our parties, I believe, are elected by local folks, and that could be one solution that would be, I think, consistent with our principles in this case. In any case, I believe the solution that involves more people and more representatives of the people would do much to avoid the inherent inconsistency and potential corruption of the current law. And so thank you for the opportunity to testify on this matter. It's been a few years since I've testified, and it might show, and I look forward to any questions you might have, Mr. Chairman, so thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. Are there any questions for the Congressman? Mr. Vice Chairman.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Congressman Huelskamp. The, you know, I was totally unaware of the example that you had from 1996. That was kind of telling, where it was stayed within a party, but it was clearly going to be manipulated in a certain fashion. I mean, to allow the governor solely to make it rather than to have the voters, you know, fill in the replacement. And the, I don't know, I had not heard that example given, and, you know, it's not, more typically the examples, of course, are a Democrat governor appointed a Democrat to replace a Republican, or otherwise, you know, from the opposite party. And I don't know, were there any other examples like that that you ran across, or was that kind of the one that just stuck in your head the most?
That's the most recent one, and that the governor from Illinois, if that's what we're referring to.
Oh, yeah,
I mean,
okay, yes.
He was sentenced to 14 years in prison. Now, that wasn't his only charge.
Yeah.
And, but he was pardoned in 2018, but he spent time in federal prison in Colorado over that matter, so.
Again, appreciate the testimony. Very good.
Are there any other questions for the conferee? Okay. Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Right. Those are the only proponents that I have listed. Is there anybody else wishing to speak as a proponent on House Bill 2057? Okay, seeing none, I'll move to neutral testimony. I have no one listed. Is there anybody wishing to speak as neutral on House Bill 2057? Okay, seeing none, I'll move to opponent testimony. I don't have anybody listed to speak in person or on WebEx. Is there anybody wishing to speak as an opponent on House Bill 2057? That does not happen in this committee often. All right, so committee, I'll direct your attention to written testimony from Carrie Sue Vosberg, Mary Stang, and Brett Anderson. Please take a look at that before we work this bill. At this time, I'm going to close the hearing on House Bill 2057, and I'm going to open the hearing on House Bill 2018. Mr. Advisor, could you give us a rundown on that bill? While we're distributing here, conferees, I'm hoping that we can work another bill today. So I'm going to ask you to try to keep your testimony to 4 minutes or less, so we have plenty of time to ask questions. Mr. Advisor, you can take as long as you want.
This is a bill that will require a lot of time. As a matter of fact, the summary is the bill itself. What the bill does is it relates to the qualification of poll workers, and it provides that the Secretary of State nor any county election officer shall disqualify any an individual from serving as a poll worker at an election on the basis of residency or registered voter status if the individual is a citizen of the United States and an active military member or spouse or other dependent. And on the back, I've made a copy of the statute that current law provides for the qualification, and it does allow for folks that are 16 years of age, at least 16 years of age, to serve. So anyway, if you have questions, I'll try and answer them. You've got a lot of folks here that...
Are there any questions for the revisor? Representative Berquist.
I think I'll wait for my questions until we get done with testimony. Thank you.
Okay. Any questions for the revisor? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. Okay, we'll move to proponent testimony. And my first conferee listed is Ms. Kim Borchers. Welcome back to the committee.
Thank you, Chairman. And thank you, members of the committee. Some of you look very familiar, and I want to thank you for the opportunity. I was here last year, and you voted this bill out of committee and went on the House floor, veto-proof. But we heard some concerns last year, and one of those areas was adding college students into the mix. And so we wanted to take that out of the equation with the hopes that we can move this through and turn it into law. I think Mr. Revisor actually made the best point here, which is we allow 16-year-olds to be poll workers. So let me give you a scenario. I'm not going to read my testimony to you, and I'll get out of here under 4 minutes, I promise. You're a military family. Your husband's been sent to Guam, and you're the mama who's staying home, and your kid comes home and says, Mom, let's go be poll workers. Well, guess what? Your 16-year-old can be a poll worker, but if you're the mom, because your family has maintained their residency in Texas, because that's where you're going to go back to when you retire, mom can't be a poll worker. That just does not make a lot of sense to me. The genesis of this bill was I have the opportunity to lead women in a civic engagement program across the country. And we did a specific outreach 2 years ago to military families. And I got to tell you, these military wives are amazing women. They're some of the most educated. They've got degrees, PhDs, but their families are uprooted time and again and placed into a new city and area, not because of their choosing, but because they chose to serve our country. I think this is a wonderful opportunity to be a solution for a problem that we find in our larger cities, which is they are needing younger poll workers. What a great outreach an election commissioner can have to go into a community like our military families and say, hey, we'd love to have you be a part of this community. But it's also an opportunity for women, and I say because that's where I was doing civic engagement, is to feel a part of a community where you can also feel so isolated. So I hope we have your support for this bill. I think it's the right thing to do. I think it makes sense. It's not a solution looking for a problem. We do have a problem. We need more poll workers. And I think this is a great way when we say we care about our troops, we need to also care about their families. So thank you.
Are there any questions for Ms. Borchers? So I have a question, and I'm sorry to put you on the spot here, but so I've had several folks who've taken a look at this bill online freak out that like, oh my God, you know, the 101st Airborne is going to air assault a polling place and, you know, occupy it and start poll working. What would you say to folks that are concerned that this might lead to a federal takeover of our elections?
What would I say? First of all, I would say that this is a tool in the tool chest for an election commissioner who is finding it very, very challenging to find poll workers. This is not a mandate. It doesn't mean that you give preferential treatment to military families, but it just does say that if you decided to volunteer to be a poll worker where the government has placed you, that you would be welcome in the community to do that.
So, for folks who are concerned about a military invasion of our polling places, would you be opposed to adding language to this that makes it clear that you're talking about people that live in the county currently but are not legal residents?
Correct. Absolutely. That's exactly. Okay. I actually tried to text here in Shawnee County because I was curious here in our elections office, do we hire people in the Shawnee County election office that have to be residents of Shawnee County? And I wasn't able to hear back from Brady yet, but even when we hired people here in Topeka, I didn't say, hey, you got to live in Shawnee County to work at the Capitol. So I just, you know what? If we let 16-year-olds be poll workers, I think this is just kind of a common sense solution.
Are there any other questions for Ms. Borchers? Okay, seeing none. Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure.
All right, next conferee I have listed is Mr. Mike Kelly. Welcome to the committee. I don't usually see you in this committee. I usually see you in tax committee, but welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee. I advocate for the entire military community. I'm with the Kansas Council of Chapters of the Military Officers Association of America. And it's very important that family members feel good about their service and where they're living. And we need to make sure those folks are welcome in the community. If there's a barrier to them participating in our key democratic process, then I think that's not a good thing. And I think this bill removes a barrier. Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I just want to respond to your comment about resident of the county. Because of housing, often the military member can be at an installation and their residence where their family is spending the night is 20 or 30 miles away. I know we have a number of folks, I live in Lawrence, I know we have a number of folks that live in Lawrence that their military member works at Fort Leavenworth. So I don't know about being a resident of the specific county, but maybe a resident of a county or an adjacent county, something like that might be up for consideration. Certainly we don't want completely unfamiliar people that haven't been vetted. That's not good for election security. But the other point I want to make on this is what Ms. Borchers brought up about the social connection. I was in the Air Force 34 years. I was married for 30 out of those 34 years. And the times I moved with my family, it was 10 different times. So it was about 3 years per place. My wife had a teaching credential, so she was able, after some occupational licensing hurdles, was able to teach in almost every location where we were stationed. So she was able to make social connections through her schoolwork and her teaching contacts and the parents of the students that she taught. Some spouses don't have that opportunity. And so spouses, to give them another opportunity for social connection through being a poll worker, I think is a great opportunity for them to be a better part of the community. Finally, if they're seen in the poll worker setting and they are following the rules and they're an industrious employee of the election commissioner, then people will notice that and they'll say, would you like to come work for me? And so maybe they can get a full-time job rather than the part-time job being a poll worker. Maybe they can get a full-time job because they've demonstrated their good work habits. Mr. Chairman, thank you for your time. I hope I'm under 4 minutes and I stand for any questions.
All right. Are there any questions for Mr. Kelly? Representative Bergkamp and then Bergquist.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do any of those states have this in their statutes, or allow non-resident military?
Representative Bergkamp, I'm sorry I did not check all 50 state statutes on this topic before I testified.
That's okay.
I can't tell you one way or the other.
Okay, no problem. I was just curious. Thank you.
Representative Bergquist.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Your comment and Mr. Kelly's comments about residency solved some of my questions. I just didn't want somebody from Virginia bringing their family here because they are military families, during active duty to come and work here. Seems a bit out of place, but somebody in another county close by sounds like a good deal. So that's kind of a question answer. I appreciate your clarification from a military perspective. Thank you.
Yes, sir. If I could respond a little bit. When I was on active duty, but under federal law, a military person can maintain their legal residency or their domicile at their home of record when they go into the service and they get transferred around. So when I was transferred around over 30 years, I kept my residency in Kansas until my last assignment was at the Pentagon, and I retired from the Pentagon, and I had to change my residency to Virginia at that time. Okay, a couple years later, I got smart and I moved back to Kansas. So the fact that somebody's from Virginia and they're moving because of federal orders, they call it permanent change of station orders, those are federal orders to the spouse. And I don't think we should denigrate anybody from Virginia because they got orders to Kansas. I mean, they followed their family here. And there's lots of patriots in Virginia, sir, and every other state. And I'd be happy to have patriotic people serve as poll workers that are affiliated with the military.
Of course, I had to pick Virginia. Thank you, sir.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Kelly? Okay. Thank you for being here, and thank you for your service.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, our final proponent that I have listed to provide oral testimony is Sarah Strider on WebEx. Ma'am, are you there?
I am. Hello.
Hello, welcome to the committee.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you, everyone. Strider, and I am the spouse of an active duty service member. Although I am not fortunate enough to be stationed in Kansas right now, my family is actually stationed overseas, so it's a good evening on my corner of the world. I'm here to testify on behalf of this bill. You could read my testimony in its full written. I won't reiterate it. Many of the points I make there have already been stated very eloquently by those who have testified before me. I also would be remiss if I didn't thank Kim for her very generous remarks on behalf of these educated military wives. I count myself as one of them. But I would just like to, I suppose, give extra texture from a constituent point of view. I lead a nonpartisan nonprofit called the Secure Families Initiative, and our whole mission is to get military partners, parents, kids, and loved ones more actively engaged in civics, either as voters or as more active advocates and civic volunteers. And as a national organization, we hear from military spouses all across the country about frustrations that they face when they try to get involved, but barriers get in the way. And residency barriers to volunteering as a poll worker is one of the most common ones that we hear about. And so I am delighted by the prospect of getting to remove that barrier for folks in Kansas. I'd actually like to spend a minute responding to some of the fantastic questions that have been raised so far by folks in the committee. And I'll start by the quicker one. It was asked whether any other states have this in statute. And as far as we are aware, the answer is no. And from my estimation, that gives Kansas a remarkable opportunity to become the first state to remove this barrier in a way that would be a model that I think other states finding themselves in a analogous predicament when it comes to poll worker recruitment, as well as with a prominent active duty base, would be a great model for others to follow, knowing that not all 50 states qualify for those two things. And there's another concern that's been raised that I really appreciate being voiced. One, what I would say mitigating factor to that concern is this. The Department of Defense actually already has very strict rules governing the activities of service members about activities they're allowed to participate in. And for example, even something like poll working is something that they are not allowed to do while in official duty like during work hours, basically when they're on the clock. They have to do it while they're on personal time, and they're not allowed to do it in uniform either. I don't know whether that makes a significant enough difference to alleviate the concern that there will somehow be a Department of Defense takeover of elections, which of course there would not. And of course, I, as a military spouse, am not a member of the military. I have signed no dotted line that says that I serve in uniform. And so when I participate, whether I'm a voter or a poll worker or some other community advocate, I'm acting as a private citizen all of the time, and I'm never a representative of the DoD. And so sharing that kind of added context hopefully alleviates some of the concern. And I'll add one more. Certainly, if there are active duty service members and their spouses currently stationed in Kansas who also happen to be Kansas voters, they can currently volunteer as poll workers. So there is already precedent for military service members and dependents being given access to this volunteer opportunity if their circumstances overlap. And so I think Mike Kelly has done a great job already explaining why what this bill is really aimed at is that family stationed in Kansas, but happens to still vote and pay state taxes back home, wherever home may be. If the committee still wants to amend this bill in order to create additional safeguards, I have two perhaps alternative recommendations to what I've heard voiced so far. Rather than making it a county-specific rule, one could just say you have to demonstrate that you have military orders within the state of Kansas, just to demonstrate that you're stationed here. Those are paperwork that all of us have and that we can provide to show that we're locally based because of the military. But of course, additionally, and we've seen this path pursued in other areas, you could exempt service members from being ineligible to be poll workers and just remove the residency barrier for spouses out of acknowledgement that we are never in any sense of the word representatives of the DoD, if that would be a safer alternative. I'm not advocating for either. I'm just saying that they would both alleviate concerns without overly reducing the benefit of the bill. So that is my added voice and texture as a representative of some of the stakeholders who would benefit from this bill. And I just want to reiterate my appreciation to this committee for taking on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Ms. Strader? Ms. Strader, I'll just say, as the husband of a military spouse, the spouses serve right alongside their service members. So thank you for your service too. And thank you for your testimony. All right, committee, we've got I don't have anybody else listed to speak as a proponent on this bill. Is there anyone wishing to speak as a proponent? Okay, seeing none, committee, I'll direct your attention to written-only testimony from Carly Goodell and Monica Bassett. Please take a look at that. And I will open neutral testimony. And our first conferee is Clay Barker. Welcome back to the committee. Frequent flyer miles.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Clay Barker, General Counsel, Kansas Secretary of State. I'll try to keep this under a minute. The Secretary has no concerns with implementing this by the counties. It seems pretty straightforward. The only request we have is that in the bill language that the reference to the Secretary of State be struck out. And that's because only county election officers have authority over appointing poll workers, and the Secretary also doesn't have any regulation authority over poll workers. And by leaving our name in there, somebody might get the negative implication that if you're prohibiting it in this area, we must have authority over poll workers somewhere else. That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Are there any questions for Mr. Barker? The ranking minority member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Barker. I'm just going, and maybe this is for the reviser, but a lot of the discussion has been upon residency and where they should be located. And on the back of the bill, we were provided the statute, and the first section A says that they need to be a resident of the area served by the voting place, and which such person. And what am I interpreting, that the poll worker has to be a resident of the area that of the precinct, or of the area of the voting location? Or
the general rule is that the poll worker needs to reside in one of the precincts that feed into that polling place, but there's additional state statutes that say if you can't get enough poll workers that fit that criteria, you can pull them from the rest of the county.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Vice Chairman.
Just one point of clarification. I don't know if it was a cause of concern. It isn't necessarily for me, but, you know, if you had the case, I mean, of course, our military spouses are centrally located, you know, at Fort Riley, somewhat at Leavenworth, at McConnell Air Force Base. I mean, if you had, say, you know, Pratt County, Kansas, was looking for some extra poll workers, and you had some people who are spouses of McConnell. I mean, as far as crossing county borders, you see any problem? I mean, it's still at the scrutiny of the, you know, county election officer as to whether they would work them or not. Is that problematic? Or would it only make sense if you're strictly in the county that your military base is in, or where you live to be at the military base?
Mr. Vice Chair, I really don't have an opinion on that. I mean, I don't see people migrating around the state looking for work. Usually the county election officer runs the county, and county and Kansas elections are done by county, so they pull county residents.
Yeah, no, I understand it, but it's like being a temp agency, you know, and it's like you're trying to get some temps to come in and help, and, you know, if they're driving 30 miles, you know, you don't care. I mean, you just need some quality help, and so I'm just, I don't know, you don't seem to think it'd be likely to ever happen anyway? Is that what you're kind of going with that?
Well, Mr. Vice Chair, we'd have to then rewrite parts of the statute about your residents being in the polling area, and then the other statutes talk about poll workers only coming from the county.
Okay, so it says on any election on the basis of residency or registered voter status, I presume basis of residency would supersede, you know, what is otherwise in statute.
I think the word to residency there means where the person would be registered to vote. Like somebody could be at Fort Leavenworth, but they're registered in Florida because that's where their place of residency is.
There's no income taxes there.
Fair enough. Appreciate your help.
Okay, are there any other questions for Mr. Barker? Okay, Representative Penn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Barker. I understand the contention that you have there, striking the language for Secretary of State out of the language of the bill. But I did want to ask you a question that maybe you can answer it. Do you know, or the Secretary of State's office, have you been informed by any of the county election officers that there are folks who are being banned from participating as election workers in Kansas?
Representative, on the basis of being in the military, or?
Just at all, regular residents. Is there a process by which they are banned, to your knowledge? I just want to understand that.
County election officers sometimes they get more poll agent volunteers than they need, which can happen. Occasionally, they've identified someone that's caused problems in the past who's disruptive at a polling place, and they won't accept them as poll agents in the future. That happens rarely, but we're aware of that happening occasionally.
So it's not a pandemic or anything like that?
It's not a widespread issue, and it's up to the county election officer. It's their call.
Okay. Well, thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
As a point of clarification, the issue that we're trying to address here, like, you know, Fort Leavenworth, we've got a ton of residents there, of military service members and dependents there who are residents of Florida and Texas, because SCRA says you can be from anywhere. They can't be poll workers right now because they're not residents of that county, let alone of Kansas. So that's kind of what we're trying to get at. So. All right, are there any other questions for Mr. Barker? Okay, seeing none. Thank you very much. All right, I don't have any other neutral conferees listed. Is there anybody else wishing to speak as neutral on this bill? Okay, seeing none, we'll move to opponent testimony. The first conferee, the only conferee I have listed is Missy Levitt. Ma'am, are you online?
Thank you, Mr. Committee members. I hope you can hear me okay.
I can hear you just fine. Welcome back to the committee.
Thank you so much. Well, I will tell you, this is not an easy bill to be an opponent for. I absolutely appreciate our military families, but I will share that my opposition to this bill has kind of transformed since I wrote my testimony. Initially, I don't see anything in our statutes that kind of protect any discrimination against actual residents. I myself have helped with an election before and will probably never be asked to return just based on my interest in election integrity. And I have also tried to recruit people to help, and they've been denied, whether some kind of background check of some manner. So there seems to be some disconnect to whether the clerk just doesn't like you, and that's fine, it's her prerogative, or maybe there's concerns because you maybe have a misdemeanor on your record for something you did years ago, months ago, who knows. So I find that it's so important that we are able to staff our elections. We've just seen an unprecedented turnout for the 2024 and in 2020, and I think everyone was able to manage and get those done effectively. I didn't really hear or have heard the Secretary of State mention anyone really not having the ability to staff the elections well. In my county, actually, we have a ton of high schoolers and college students that are residents of our county that are helping. And I personally find that to be my favorite part of going to vote now and watching the elections take place. I think it's so important for our youth to be incorporated into that. Sometimes I get chastised because I wasn't a voter straight away when I was 18. Some of the politics took time in my life for me to grab a hold of, and I kind of hope that that's something we're going to try to transform in our young people, where they want to be involved at a younger age. And I think that the poll agent thing is a wonderful place to start. However, with the military piece here, I have a lot of concern over what we might open a door for. I happen to believe that mail-in ballots was originally started through the military, and now it's like a nationwide thing. Everybody can do it. Kind of the same way with HAVA. HAVA was created to give opportunities for disabled people to vote with the assistance of machines, and now everybody has machines. And so I don't want this to turn into something that maybe we don't intend. And then I had some concerns that, there's no language in the bill about what type of ID, any type of, I'm not familiar with deployment orders or anything like that. So I would just like some clarity. Is there any punishments for stolen valor? Should that be a thing? I don't even know how any of that works. And I don't know how we would, how are we planning to define a dependent of a military family? I think that the government requires us to keep insurance on our kids up to past 20 now. My kids are young, so I'm not there yet in my life, but there's just some additional things that I would prefer to have in this bill before we pass it out, and just express those concerns for having the inclusion of the people who are residents, and maybe some clearer language on that if it's possible. And I do appreciate that you took out the college kids. That was a big, huge issue for me on the last introduction of this bill. But otherwise, I will stand for questions, and I thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you for your testimony. Are there any questions for Ms. Levitt? Okay, seeing none, thank you for your testimony. All right, I don't have anyone else listed as wanting to speak as an opponent. Is there anyone wishing to speak as an opponent on House Bill 2018? Okay, seeing none, committee, I'll direct your attention to written-only testimony from Carrie Sue Vosberg, Brett Anderson, and Mary Stang. Please take a look at that, and I'm closing the hearing on House Bill 2018. Okay, committee, we've got a little bit of time, so I would like to work HCR 5004, and I would entertain a motion on that for the purpose of discussion. Representative Penn.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we take up and pass out favorably HCR 5004 for passage. Thank you.
Is there a second? Okay, second from the Vice Chairman. Is there any discussion? I've got discussion. Okay, so I've got an amendment here for this bill. I'd like to make a motion to pass this amendment. Do I have a second? A second from the Vice Chairman. So what this does is simplify the description. As we've seen on constitutional amendments, the longer and more confusing the description, the less likely it is to be adopted by voters. And so I wanted to make it abundantly clear since we're not changing the age requirement, we're not changing the residency requirement, I've removed those from the description. So now it just says that this amendment would clarify that only a person who is a citizen of the United States is eligible to vote in this state, which is the only thing that this resolution would change in the Constitution. Are there any questions or other discussion on this amendment? Okay, seeing none, I will close on my amendment. You've heard the motion. All those in favor of amending signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, no? No. Okay, the motion carries. We're back on the bill as amended. Is there any discussion on the bill, or the resolution, rather? Okay, seeing none. Representative Penn, will you renew your motion as amended?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I move that we pass out HCR 5004 as amended favorably for passage. Thank you.
Okay. Do you renew your second there, Mr. Vice Chairman? Okay, you've heard the motion. All those in favor of passing out HCR 5004 favorably signify by saying aye. As amended, signify by saying aye. Okay, sorry. I don't want research mad at me again. All those opposed signify by saying no. Okay, the ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. HCR 5004 is passed favorably. Stand by for just a moment, committee. All right. Committee, that concludes our business for today then. I would not have told you at the beginning of this day that we were going to be done a half hour early with those two particular bills. Is there anything for the good of the committee, good of the order? Okay. So committee, the agenda is in motion for next week because we don't have all the bill numbers yet. But my intent is that on Tuesday, we're going to hear House Bill 2106, which is on foreign funding for constitutional amendment campaigns, or banning foreign funding. And then on Thursday, we're going to hear House Bill 2017, which is about the 3-day grace period. And I don't have a bill number yet, but another one about the Campaign Finance Act and providing more definition to the definitions in that act that we talked about in the first committee hearing. So keep an eye on the agenda. As soon as we get a bill number, we'll update the agenda. Is there anything else for the good of the order? Okay, seeing none, we're adjourned.